And our guest joining us this hour pops into the studio on a monthly basis, sometimes more frequently, Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game. And right off the top today, he's going to be talking about, depending on your perspective, some people will say this is actually good news. Others will probably say this is bad news. We were just spending the last 20 minutes on the air talking about got to have revenue coming in from somewhere. Government can't operate in a vacuum. But first of all, welcome back.
Well, I appreciate it. It's glad to be back.
I,
It's like the whole year's changed from last time I was here. It's like a whole different season almost.
well, it's not a lot warmer, but a lot of that snowpack is down.
A lot of the snowpack down is down, and the water's running hot and heavy still up in the mountains. It's amazing when you get up there to see uh, the stream depth, the how much water's in the reservoirs, and those are some things we'll be talking about. It's pretty amazing the amount of water we have this year.
You do want to talk though, and we were just off air talking about Montana just had a fee increase because, of course, they're dealing with mussels, a mussel
Well,
infestation.
they're concerned about the quagga mussels, and so are we. I mean, we've got the Department of Ag's in charge of that, but we've got a lot of different things in place to hopefully keep those out of the state.
The fee increase coming here though is for an entirely different reason.
It is. There's a couple of them, and I wanted to get talk to folks about this. The first one is a depredation fee increase that takes place May 1st, and this depredation fee increase. So, if you purchase your licenses this year before May 1st, you don't uh, have to pay that $5 increase. It's kind of like other states have a habitat stamp and things like that, but this one's the ear tag for access and depredation, and the depredation is the loss of standing crops or stored crops by uh, you know everybody from farmers to tree growers and nurseries and things like that. Um, and then any of that money that we don't use on the depredation, there's a percentage of it that's going to go to the purchase of access to purchase access on private property for hunters and anglers. And so, I guess it's going to cost a little bit more, but I do think it's going to help out a ton. The way it works, Bill, is like if I buy a fishing license, I'll get assessed that $5 fee. Non-residents will get a $10 fee, and anybody on disability or youth or elderly permits will have to pay $2. Um, but if I buy my fishing license, then I go back and I buy a hunting license later, I don't have to pay another $5 on that. It's a one-time fee per year.
And we've had calls before. People are concerned about this. So again, it doesn't come free.
Well, no, and I mean every time and I mean I understand every time we purchase something or things change like this, it costs us a little bit more out of what we might want to buy a toy with or what we might want to pay, buy something else with. But this is a pretty critical as populations grow in an area, and I mean our elk populations are growing great guns right now. We've got more elk on the front ranges, and front ranges I mean down here near ag land than we've ever had. Um, since we've really been keeping numbers. And so we've got a ton of depredation complaints with elk. And this year was a tough winter, and it really pushed a lot of elk and deer down into ag fields. And we had a lot of depredation problems. And hopefully this will help us be able to maintain large herds for the sportsmen, but also be able to work with landowners to help mitigate damages that they suffer from these larger herds of animals. And
And
so that's our goal with this.
the other debate had been over the lack of a fee increase for a decade.
Well, it had, and this is a little bit different. This is we also received a fee increase that will begin of in January or December of next year when you buy later this year in December when you purchase your license. You could see a small fee increase unless you buy a license this year because it's a price lock program. And so like if I buy my hunting and fishing license, a combo license, and a deer and elk tag every year, I will never see an increase if I've been buying it every year. Um, what we have is it's interesting. I didn't realize that people had done this because I've never not had a hunting and fishing license in Idaho since I was old enough to have one. Um, but we've got a ton of fishermen that will buy a fishing license, and I mean some of it follows the salmon steelhead seasons and stuff like that too. When we have good runs, we have more people buy fishing licenses. Um, but um, so those guys will churn out. Some of those guys will only buy and ladies and gentlemen will only buy a license once every 5 years, once every 6 years. A lot of our people really rotate through buying hunting and fishing licenses. People that buy them every year will not see an increase in fees. They'll be locked in at the prices that they're paying this year for the next 5 years. Then we'll re-examine it, and if things are doing well, it'll stay that way. We really believe that if we can just pick up 10 or 15% of the people that churn out every other year or once every 5 years, if we can get them to buy it 3 years in a row instead of, once every 5 years, we'll raise enough uh, money to be able to keep keep things going the way they are and hopefully be able to increase and add some more programs.
And to let people know, again, there's no serious budget line for your office. So,
What
you've got to rely on this.
we do. We're a dedicated fund agency. If you do not buy a hunting and fishing license, you do not pay anything for the management of animals in Idaho. Plain and simple. We don't get any funding out of the general tax fund. It's solely paid for by hunters and anglers, and so it's so without that, I mean, I guess I pull up, and I know there's a lot of people that are frustrated with different things that are going on. They're not seeing the things that they'd like to see happen, but this money's critical for us to be able to manage wildlife. It costs us $1,000 an hour right now just to fly a helicopter for the rental of that helicopter to do population counts. Well, these hills down below Twin Falls, the South Hills down here, Unit 54 and 55, we flew 60 hours this fall, so $60,000. 10 years ago, that was $300 to $500 to do that exact same survey. So it's tough on us to be able to maintain the current even knowledge of what's going on in the hills. I mean, we've increased our ground surveys and things like that, where we drive out with a bunch of us and we'll get on binoculars and glass certain areas, but we just do not get the same picture of what's going on with wildlife populations without having those aerial surveys. And right now we're in the process of flying sage grouse. We flew mountain goats last week, and every one of those, it's all that flying time has increased, and we've really had to cut back on the hours of flying that we've done. Like down the South Hills, we're lucky if we can fly it once every 5 years. They're sitting here, well, why once every? Because, well, the problem is we try to fly the entirety of the state, and so it's not just the Magic Valley region that has, we're doing this flying in. And so these fee increases, price like, hopefully we can get more people purchasing licenses every year, getting out and enjoying fishing with their kids, because that's where our biggest churn is in the angling licenses and fishing licenses. And so if we can do that, we should be in good shape for years to come.
People, too, that just that we may not think about it, but in other parts of the state, the winter was so harsh and there was such a snow depth in some places that you had to have some flight time, extra flight time in those areas just to monitor the situation.
Well, we just had lots and lots of added costs this last year just because of the tonnages of hay that we was purchasing. People don't think about it. They look at a price of hay, this last fall is around $85, $65, as low as $65 for feeder hay. Well, that's fine and good, but we cannot use feeder hay for elk because we're feeding on national forest or on BLM, so we are looking for weed-free hay. Weed-free hay gets real expensive when you start buying it for as many elk as we was buying it for, and we're paying over $200 a ton. Where if I was feeding cattle down in the field, I could buy it for $65 to $85 a ton. Winter is harsh enough. Hay prices really got driven up. A lot of the ranchers were using their storage for their own animals that they would typically sell. And so, yeah, and there was just a lot of other costs incurred. Fortunately, we had a lot of great people that volunteered a ton of time to help us to to get some of these projects done and do as well, get through the winter as well as we did with the elk and the deer.
I did hear a good note from State Senator Lee Hyder last night that even though they didn't get any action done on a bill about Japanese yew,
Yeah.
he said that a lot of your big stores that, home and garden locations and Costco and the like too, have decided not to sell it anymore because they're so alarmed by what's happened.
Well, it is, and it's a sad deal. We've had several hundred animals across the state killed this last year from getting into Japanese yew. Get a hard winter, push more animals into the yards. It's a really pretty ornamental shrub. They get down there, it's green, walking by your window well or something like that. They take a few bites. It's better for all of us if we don't have the Japanese yew. I mean, my dogs, I mean, I throw a stick out to my dogs, they pick it up, they chew on it and stuff like this. Well, if it was Japanese yew, that would kill them. It's very toxic to pretty much anybody that touches it, and so I mean chews on it or gets it, ingests it in any way, and so that's a good thing, and hopefully we can get people's knowledge up on it, and it'll be a ornamental they'll quit using, go to some other things that are more wildlife friendly.
917 and Kelton Hatch is our guest from Idaho Fish and Game, and we're at 50. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. We have a caller. Caller, you're up next.
Hey, hello. Hope you guys are doing well today.
Thanks.
Uh, regards to the money that comes in and goes out, passes through IDFG, I wonder if you could tell me, since Wildlife Services has been in the news so much with their M44s and coyote programs and that sort of thing, can you tell me or tell all of us how much IDFG gives to Wildlife Services for predator control and where that money comes from and how that might offset these fee increases?
Okay, well, I appreciate that question. I can answer part of that. It's between $50,000 and $100,000 a year that we give them for control. Some of that money has been used on wolves in the past when we've had depredation on livestock, like up in Copper Basin, for instance. They turn several thousand head of cows out there, and every year um, there for several years, they lost quite a few animals up there, and so we would that funding that we gave to Wildlife Services was to manage some of those, and when those wolves in that area. If we have problems with mountain lions, it's used for. If we have problems with black bears, some of that money is used for, and then there is some that's used in coyote. I don't know how the removal of coyotes in certain areas. We try to target those on fawning areas when but they do a lot of wildlife services will go in and remove coyotes near lambing areas was part of the original intent. But we also, when we have that money, we try to put something towards more of the areas where we could have fawns and things like that. But $50,000 to $100,000 is eaten up really, really quick for them, and so it's just a small portion of their budget.
Want to thank you for the call, and we've got more with Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game on the way, and more of your telephone calls too as well. It's 920 50. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Joining us in studio this morning, Kelton Hatch. He's joining us from Idaho Fish and Game, and he does this on a monthly basis. Judging by the flashing telephone lines, we may have to start doing it much more often.
Well, whenever you talk about hunting, like we was talking off the air, it's an emotional subject, and I'm glad people are tied into it so strongly in Idaho.
And we wanted to point out it's just part of the tradition of living here. Also, speaking of traditions, spring comes along. We say it's a tradition too, not just actually a scientific happening, and that means things will be drying out sometime. When that happens, a lot of people who've been planning on building their dream house are probably thinking, I've got to get started, and I've got to get started now so I can at least enjoy some of it during the course of the summer. And I've been telling you, you need to call the folks or go online and check out the website at Western Visions Inc. and find out the type of work they can do. Western Visions Inc. will build a house from the ground up, and they do renovations as well. Renovating right now as I'm speaking, finishing up, putting the finishing touches on a historic property in Cassia County. Russell Smith, who's actually the man behind Western Visions Inc., has been building or renovating homes and other properties now for, 30 years. off and on for 30 years. I should point out he was working in a highly placed government position for a number of years. But he won't talk about that. He won't bore you with that. He will, though, keep you included in the planning process from start to finish. So you won't have somebody who's just going to come back to you a few months down the road and say, here you go. You'll actually be consulted all along the way of the actual build. And if you'd like to know more, go to the website western-visions.com. That's western-visions.com. We've got a couple of things on your agenda today. We probably should get to these before we take more phone calls. I see this one. Time for once-in-a-lifetime applications.
Yeah. What's going on is right now it's for bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and moose. You got till the end of the month if you're looking at applying for one of those species for the controlled hunts. But just a caution, if you do draw that, or if you apply for that, you don't even have to draw it. If you apply for that, you can't put in for deer, elk, antelope permits either. You were limited to just those trophy species. But it's that time right now, and so if you're interested, get signed up.
Super hunt application.
Super hunt. Governor's tags basically, if you draw one of these tags, you can hunt in any open or all the open units with that specific weapon. We have super tags for deer, elk, antelope, and moose. Or you can, I always kind of refer to the one as the super pack is the divorce package because you could draw the super combo. You could draw one of each of those tags, so you'd get all four of them. Those applications are going on right now. May 1st is let's think. No, it's the end of the month. It's the deadline for that. It's May 31st, and we'll have our first drawing then, and then we'll have another drawing August 10th. And so if you don't make the first one, get your applications in for the second one, but I'd get in on both of them just because those would be great opportunities.
There's
And
something.
all that money, I was going to tell you, all that money goes to purchasing access for sportsmen. That's an Access Yes program funding source.
Usually you have to answer that question every month.
I do. I do.
It hasn't come up yet today. Telephone number 736-0300. Also, you're looking for good-hearted people in the way of volunteers to help with planting and things. There's a lot of projects that go on, and because of that limited budget you have, you really do ask the community to come out and help out.
Well, the thing is the best way to get bought into something is getting your fingers dirty. People always have more respect for what they've worked on. You don't give a kid a new bike, you make them buy a new bike, and when they buy that new bike, they take care of it. Well, I feel that's the same way with the habitat around here, and we have a lot of volunteers that have been out. So far, we've planted about 22,000 Wyoming big sage and antelope bitterbrush plants on areas that were burned. These areas are critical for winter ranges, and it's just kind of getting sage grouse and mule deer and pygmy rabbits and a lot of our different just a lot of different animals in the Magic Valley rely on this. And so if you're interested in helping us do this, go to our Fish and Game Facebook page. It's Idaho Fish and Game Magic Valley, and we have the different dates. I think we have, I'm trying to think. I think all we have is student plannings left now, but if you're wanting to get involved in that, just we're give us a holler and talk to Tana Ray Alberti. She can get you lined up with something.
We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. No, you may have answered the question.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes that happens. You talk about pride in doing something. I haven't been there in 11 years, but 11 years ago I was in my hometown, and I drove by my old high school, and out front there's a bulletin board, a billboard,
Mm-hmm.
and the base of it is about 2 feet high, and it's concrete in the center with bricks around the side, and the bricks were of a color to match the high school, the look of the high school. And I drove by it, and it may still be there. I could probably check online, but I had a sense of pride. I didn't have it when I built it in 1979 because I was being punished. I hadn't done anything really bad, but my dad decided that I needed to do a community project. So I built that thing, and I didn't know a lot about mixing concrete. And as you drive by, you can actually see it. In the middle, it's slightly bowed because the way I got the concrete poured inside, in the forms, apparently the forms bowed a little bit. And so it's wider in the center than it is at the two ends of that rectangle, but it still stands and all the bricks are still in place. And I think it still stands. But as I drove by it, I was miserable because I missed a carnival while I was doing it. And I was miserable as it was taking place, but I can never forget driving by it, 30 some years later and going, wow, that feels pretty good. We have a caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Thanks. That was not me that hung up.
Oh, okay.
Hey, I'd like to continue this thread with the Wildlife Services if I can. I have a couple of other questions on it.
Okay.
Now, Kelton, you said $50,000 to $100,000 a year comes out of the IDFG budget and goes to Wildlife Services. I also, if I heard correctly, you said that was a lot of that was money paid to kill wolves that were munching on cattle, which
or sheep.
Essentially, yeah, cattle and sheep. Okay, so livestock, which is using sportsman fee money to handle an agricultural issue. That's one thing that pops into my head. But also, Wildlife Services is funded. It in order to maintain their budget, they must receive private funds, which are then matched by federal funds. And so, is it appropriate to use sportsmen's money to take an opportunity away from sportsmen and give that money to Wildlife Services? It's going from a state agency to a pseudo-government agency.
On that note, we'll get
money.
to that. We'll get to that on the other end of the break. Hard break. We can't avoid it. 9:30. Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fishing Game with us for the next half hour, and he'll have a response to that coming up in just a few minutes. Kelton Hatch is joining us in studio from Idaho Fishing Game. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Just a quick note. We'll get to the answer for our caller in just a moment. But I wanted to reference people like me who are getting to that age where, if I'd become a school teacher, I could be retired. But I digress. If you're thinking you need to have some planning put in place, maybe you're a young person out there just getting started, I've been recommending Waddell & Reed right here in Twin Falls. This is a firm that has been in business since 1937, one of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds. And in fact, Waddell & Reed owns and manages 2 mutual fund families, investing by a conservative nature. Do they know what they're doing? Again, they've been in business 8 decades. And they'll take an approach about planning with you and look at each piece of your puzzle, knowing that you need to have proper expectations. But Waddell & Reed also knows that individual clients have individual needs and goals. They'll help you manage the money, and Waddell & Reed takes planning personally. So the answer for the caller, he had sort of a 4-part question, I guess.
And I'm going to try to cover this. Like I said earlier, I'm not an expert on this, and so I'm really grasping at straws on some of this. It's on whether it's right to use this money. In certain areas, 60% of our mule deer winter range is on private property. A large portion of our wildlife in certain parts of the state are subsidized, for lack of a better term, on private property. And so I believe that and you could ask 10 people and you'd get 10 different answers on this. But we do owe a lot to a lot of our landowners because they allow wildlife, or they have wildlife that are born or live a certain part of the year on their property, and that's why we have landowner appreciation tags and these other things. We're also mandated by the legislature to give somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 each year to Wildlife Services for these causes. And like I said earlier, we can direct that money, but I mean, it is a legislative mandate that we do give that money to Wildlife Services for operating on that. We've used them for raven removal, for sage grouse studies that we've been doing. We've used them for coyote and mountain lion removal on mule deer studies that we've been doing over in eastern Idaho. We had a 6 or 8 year mule deer study that was going on predation and different removal of predators. We had a control area and another area that we removed some of the predators from, and they helped us with that. And so, it's a symbiotic relationship that we can work with them, and they can help us in a lot of different ways. And you know, uh, that's about all I've got on it because hopefully that answers your question.
And I guess the federal government has a simpler approach. They just gas everything. We have another caller with us. You're on the air on Top Story. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning there. Kelton, I got some questions up here in Blaine County. Huge payments were made out on depredation, and to a lot of these ranches are corporate owned or owned by local politicians and things like that. And they refused access to hunters that wanted to hunt on there last fall, to help reduce the numbers. Instead, referred a lot of us were referred to guide services and would have to pay a huge uh, fee to get on these properties where these depredation payments were made out to. And I know, seeing some of the fines some of the hunters got for trespassing in the paper and losing their hunting license, I think there's a lot of people feel like, if a depredation payment is made, that access should be granted, that perhaps, uh, hunting rights on this private ground, if they're taking these huge depredation payments, and then turn right around and sign an agreement with a guide service, to hunt on that ground. I mean, that's like the candy store for these guys up here. And I think a lot of hunters, feel the way I do, that it probably has to be addressed at the legislative level. But yeah, you get a depredation payment for game, then open your gates, let the hunters in.
Yeah, it's a really. I wish it was that simple on a lot of these. And I mean, you look at it and people just look at things with different colored glasses, I guess, on because a lot of these landowners feel that they raise a lot of these animals that then disperse and go onto the public property. They lose thousands of dollars on. I mean, we have tree farms up there that have lost thousands of dollars. It wasn't just ranchers and farmers. Um, and my problem is I'm not completely up to speed on exactly. There's one of the programs that if they receive any funding from it, they have to allow access to a point. But the other thing we got to remember is this is also private property rights. We have private property rights, and um, you can't really just open things up quite that easily because I don't know. This is probably a better one if you just give me a call and I could direct you to the right people and we could talk about it a little bit more because I'm fumbling all over myself trying to wasn't quite prepared for that one. So I'll see what I can figure out and then come back with you next month and talk more about it.
Want to thank him for the call. We're at 9:40 and it's 50. Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game in studio with us until 10 o'clock this morning. Bill Colley as well. On Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I wanted to mention before we get back to our guest, Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game. He joins us on a monthly basis, on a regular basis on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 50, and it's coming up on 9:43. Just a quick note, and I haven't been out doing any new clothing shopping yet, but with my tax return on the way, I probably will be. I have lost 4 inches alone off my neck since end of September, and everywhere else around my body even more because of the total body transformation system. It's not a fad diet. It's actually scientifically proven, and it will help actually increase your metabolism and help you lose weight. But it's a healthy way to lose weight, too, as well. Developed by a company been in business now over 20 years with an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau. The average participant will burn 6 times more fat and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. The meal replacement plan, people ask me about that. It's about the same as the groceries you're replacing, and it's also often healthier than the meals you've been eating. You still, though, get a healthy amount of calories. The average participant will lose 4 inches off his or her waist in just 60 days, as well as 22 pounds. And if you'd like to know more, got to call Don Chandler. He's the marketing executive who also lost in excess of 50 pounds himself on the diet. His telephone number, 208-731-3560. Again, Don's number is 731-3560. I had a chance to talk to Don Zook last night at the Republican committee meeting, and Don says he's going to soon be a customer as well. So lots of people taking a look at this and saying this is a good way to maintain your health, but also to lose weight. Couple of things Kelton's going to be talking with us about before we end the program. We've
Well,
got to get to this.
can I say one thing? I feel bad that I couldn't answer that question a little bit better than that, and I will get back on something like that. It's just some of these are so complicated to get through on the reasoning that
Hmm.
things are going that it is really hard to cover, and I just want to make sure I say the right thing. So I'll try to come back with something a little bit better next time.
And we should point out too, it's like anything else. I know this from writing a column, and you used to do that too.
Uh-huh.
Talking on the radio versus putting it down in print. Sometimes the print's the better way to get the point across.
Well, it is because I actually have more than 30 seconds to think about my answer. And some days I'm just not as quick as others. So,
Two things you wanted to mention before we wrap up: shed antler hunting.
shed antler hunt, this has become a huge issue. I bet I get spoken to a half a dozen times a day on this. We really got an issue right there, and I think personally, I think it's very social media driven. In a lot of ways, people are out there trying to find antlers, show off who found the most antlers, found the biggest ones, get the biggest pile of them, and because of that, we're getting tons and tons of complaints, and we're having a lot of issues with people harassing wildlife. This is kind of later in the year, and so it's not as crucial as it was a month ago. And we mentioned it then, but one thing for folks to remember, it's you can't harass wildlife. If you see a bull that's dropped an antler, you can't go chase it until it drops the other one. Or the best thing to do is sit back and watch them. And when you find antlers, wait for them to move out, and then go back up and get them. Um, we've just got a lot of problems. Buckhorn the other day, we had 6 guys that were over between Oakley and Murtaugh, uh, over in Unit 54. We had 6 guys traversing the BLM on their ATVs through one of our plantings that we just had put up there and looking for shed antlers. That's illegal now. The BLM has a off-road rule that you have to stay to maintain roads and trails. And they're talking to people about it this year, and so just be aware of that. But I guess the big thing is just be respectful of each other and the wildlife. As populations grow and more people get in these different areas, I mean, we can have a major impact. Um, I often joke around. It's not hard to manage wildlife. It's hard to manage people.
You could always just drive over to Jackson and just try to yank them out of the arches.
And so
Although,
yeah, there you
be
go.
like the old game Kerplunk, you got to
Yeah,
be careful.
careful, but no, they I do understand they're worth some money. People are selling them for some pretty good money and stuff like that. But it's not a life and death situation. And I know some people try to make some money off of them. You can make some, but when you start adding up your hours and your gas and your truck, you'll soon find out that it's pretty pretty even, flat across the board on what you made. But be out and have some fun. Get out, stretch your legs, and do that type of stuff. But just have some respect for others that are out there in the wildlife.
We have a caller with us. Coming up on 948, we're at 51. Kelton Hatch joining us in studio on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're up next.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. You sound like you're in a cave.
Yeah, okay. Let me get on the. Can you hear better now? I'm calling from Eastern Idaho.
Cool.
Listening to your program. Listen, couple comments. Every member of the state, every citizen of the state benefits from our fish and game programs because of the tourism it generates, because of the opportunity to bring in new wealth into the state. Why can't we get a budget appropriated so there's some stability in fish and game from the state coffers? Number one. And number two, why can't fish and game allow free-ranging brucellosis-free bison on that big patch of desert between Arco and Shoshone to deal with fire control? If you had free-ranging bison out there, you would have a better fire control measure in place. And I'll hang up. Listen.
Both good comments. There's been a lot of discussion. That's why a lot of DNRs, Department of Natural Resources, have been formed so that they can get the state coffers. Utah, Montana, a lot of these other places, wildlife parks, DNRs where state lands and everybody's together. A lot of that, the reason we don't end up getting anything out of the state coffers is because of sportsmen's groups. A lot of them have really been strong about trying to keep, even though everybody owns wildlife, they like having, I guess, paid for it so that they feel that they have a stronger say, which I think they do in some ways, because they're the ones footing the bill. I don't know whether that's going to stay forever, but currently it's a system that we have. But I definitely see your point on that. On the bison, that's going to take a lot smarter person than me to figure that one out, because there's a lot of things you would have to deal with. One is grazing rights, how to maintain those animals. We've got a herd of elk out there that we struggle with, um, that get into all the crops and the cornfields and wheat and potato fields from over there by Arco all the way over here to Hazleton. And you know, in theory, I think it would be good, but I think in reality, it'd be really, really difficult to manage those guys to keep them where they needed to be. And there's enough roads in that area. I think we could also have some issues when people hit them versus hitting an elk. Elk is bad enough, and deer are, but that, I mean, it's something to look at and maybe explore further. But that's something I might bring up with your commissioner. Lane Cleasy's your commissioner over there, and I'm glad to hear it. Eastern Idaho folks. That's my home. That's my stomping ground. So glad to hear you're listening.
You crawled out of some sort of hot spring over there.
Yeah. Yep, just down the road from me.
When it comes to brucellosis, there is, I understand, a vaccination, but in order to do that, first of all, you got to track down all these animals. Number two, you got to figure out a way to sedate them. It would be a really costly
Well,
program.
brucellosis free. I mean, you'd bleed them and test them to make sure they didn't have the bangs. Whenever you vaccinate them, it does show a marker that they could be a carrier of it. Um, we're fighting brucellosis right now at the feed sites coming out of Wyoming, out of over on the South Fork of the Boise, over in Stump Creek out of Soda Springs. We've actually killed elk that had brucellosis in those areas. Um, it would be nice to have brucellosis-free animals, but I just don't know how it would work out on some of that country out there. So, but like I said, that'd be somebody a lot higher up the tree than me that'd be making that decision.
You mentioned early in the show that we have a lot of water flowing up in the hills and the mountains.
Holy mackerel.
That does impact fishing.
Well, it does, and I just want to give a warning to folks. I mean, if you're headed down to Salmon Falls Creek Reservoir, there's been several folks that have tried to back their trucks and their boats in at Norton and Big Sandy. Um, that bottom's not solid like it was when we had all that shore bank and people could back out and dump their boats. A lot of them are calling tow trucks now to pull their vehicles out because they get buried so deep. The water's really come up. We're higher than we've been for a long ways. I would really recommend Lud Drexler for launching your boats, just for security, safety. The problem is over there is the water's so high, there's not a lot of places to park. Fishing's starting to pick up at Walcott and Salmon Falls Creek. The Rainbow are really, really doing good. But it's not the same old deal that we've had for the last 10 years. You just can't back in anywhere and launch your boat like you had been. And some of those they've been working on those roads out at Norton and Big Sandy, the BLM had, and up in the headwaters. A lot of water out there, a lot of water. But fishing in the lakes are good. I don't think fishing in the streams are going to be very good for a while because I don't have a heavy enough line to get the hook down where the fish would be because I think it'd just wash everything right down in front of you quick.
Yeah, just the speed that water.
Oh yeah, the water's just boiling right now, and I mean I was over to Oakley and they're high, and I think Oakley should be doing pretty well. Magic will be doing pretty well here before long. Littlewood and some of those reservoirs up in there. We did have a big die-off over at Mormon, and so we'll be restocking that. But, I think it's going to be a great fishing year once spring runoff kind of slows down and people can get into some of the lakes and stuff like that.
We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. We're at 9:54. You're on Top Story. Kelton Hatch, our guest from Idaho Fish and Game.
Yes, Kevin, I'm hearing about rumors go around, but this thing about killing sow bears with their cubs in the den. Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard rumors about that, and I don't know who was supposedly killing them.
Yeah, I don't know.
You see, and I'd heard we'd actually had one case that we had a radio collar bear, and it was several years ago that some wolves had killed. That's the only case I know of on that. If there's a hunt or a hunting season for it, I'd heard something about it being back from DC. This rumor going around. People aren't going to be able to do it anyway because number one, finding a den to be able to do it, maneuvering a way around in the snow that time of year to be able to do it, and then just be able to locate them. I just if it's humans, I just don't see it being viable. Wildlife is wildlife, and every once in a while, animals kill. Well, all the time, animals kill other animals. They're predators and prey, and so. But I don't know anything about other than that one case with the wolf. And we've got a lot of radio-collared bears and a lot of radio-collared wolves, so I don't think that's common. So I really don't know what's going on with that.
This is one of those stories. I don't want to call it fake news, but it got wound around the internet to the point where I saw some website out of the East Coast where it said that people were doing that in Idaho, and I never heard of that.
No.
And it's become an urban legend.
It is because there's no season. It's against the law to hunt bears that time of year. Bear season opened April 15th. And so that's just a few days away. Bears are out of their den by then, most of them. It's been a long, hard winter. They're ready to come out and stretch their legs. And so, and it is illegal to harvest any sow with a cub. If you see any cub of any size with another bear, you can't harvest that bear because even if it's the cub's is almost as big as her before she kicks them off. My daughter, she was heartbroken because she spotted this great big bear, but it had 3 cubs that were almost her size that were wandering around with her. They weren't quite as big, but they were good sized cubs. But it's just like, well, that's the law. And so I'm sure it's just an urban legend that's going around.
I wanted to thank him for the call and all the other callers. We've got about a minute left. Anything we didn't get to?
It's just that time of year to get out and start enjoying things. Some of the biggest things to watch out for is the roads up in the South Hills are still, the forest isn't open yet, and so people are stuck to the BLM. They're really trashed right now. So if you're getting out there, I'd suggest doing it on your legs, stretching them out and doing some walking around to try to avoid any resource damages up in some of those areas. Ticks are coming out, and so you need to be cautious of that. We're seeing some Lyme disease in this part of the state, as well as Rocky Mountain tick fever every once in a while. Real low chance of getting it, so don't freak out. But just if you wear light clothing, it's easier to see the ticks on them when they're crawling across you. And so somebody told me, well, all you have to do is wear light clothing and you won't get ticks on you. Well, no, you can see them so they don't get buried in you quite as soon. So, but just get out and have some fun. Enjoy what Idaho has to offer.
I think that I've never had a problem with ticks yet, and I think that must be something that they don't like about me, which is fine.
You must be sour or too sweet for them, one or the other.
Mosquitoes love me, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know because all of them like me.
We'll see Kelton Hatch again in a few weeks. We're coming up at 10 o'clock in the Rush Limbaugh program after Fox News at 10. And God willing, the creek don't rise. I'll be back here Monday morning. We're off tomorrow for Good Friday. Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. And just really, to everybody out there, enjoy this weekend and happy Easter.